I request all the dignitaries to take their seats on the dais. I request all the dignitaries to take their seats on the dais. A warm good morning to all the dignitaries on the dais, off the dais, delegates, and my fellow colleagues. I, Professor Albina Joshi,
and I, Dr. Anil Sonawne,
we welcome you all for the one-day Multidisciplinary International Conference.
On the dais, we have amongst us the chairperson, His Grace Dr. Archbishop Dr. Felix Machado. We also have the keynote speaker, Professor Claudia Lang, and we have our principal, Dr. Somnath Vibhute, and vice principal, Sarita Kurian, and the convener of the conference, Dr. Tushar Rao.
Of the dais, we have amongst us our ex-principal and campus minister, Father Dr. Solomon Rodrigues, and a panelist for today's conference, Dr. Sachin Labde. I invite dignitaries on the dais to come forward and light the lamp. His Grace, Right Reverend Archbishop Dr. Felix Machado,
seat.
Professor Claudia Lang, Dr. Somnath Vibhute, Professor Sarita Kurian, Dr. Tushar Rao. With the brightness of this light, let us pray that darkness in all the forms within and around us fades away and inspires us and others to rise upwards always. Thank you all. I request the dignitaries to remain off the dais for University Anthem.
As the tradition goes, we start the academic gatherings with the University Anthem.
I request the dignitaries to take their seats on the dais. All others, please be seated. Now I request the principal, Dr. Somnath Vibhute, to give the introduction of the conference.
Respected Chairman and our patron, His Grace Right Reverend Archbishop Dr. Felix Machado, today's keynote speaker, Professor Claudia Lam, former principal of the college and campus minister, Reverend Father Dr. Solomon Rodriguez, Vice Principal Professor Sarita Kurian, panelist Sachin Labde, and my dear colleagues and dear participants, academicians, researchers, a warm welcome to all of you in this international conference on sustainable development goals, recent trends in knowledge production in languages, humanities, business, management, sponsored by the Indian Council of Social Science Research, Western Regional Center. Dear participants, the journey of humankind has been extremely interesting from least developed to highly developed societies. Especially in the last 4 or 5 decades, we have witnessed phenomenal growth pushing development forward. Today, we have everything in this material world to fulfill all our wants. However, during this journey from nothing to everything, there has been an excessive and insane use of resources, including water, forests, minerals, and whatnot. Dear participants, this has posed a serious challenge for the existence of mankind and other species on this beautiful planet. And therefore, the United Nations have given serious thought initially in the form of Millennium Development Goals, that is the MDGs, transformed into Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, and now it is called as Goals for 2030. You are aware that 17 goals and 169 targets aim at making the life of all more meaningful and peaceful. To mention a few of these goals: responsible consumption and production, inclusive growth through partnership, coupled with quality education, are very significant in deciding the future of all. However, this does not mean that other goals are less important. We are happy that the academicians, teachers, and research students have gathered here to listen to the findings on diverse aspects of the SDGs. This thirst to know more about the reflections of Sustainable Development Goals in contemporary literature of humanities, management, social sciences, along with businesses, is a sign that yes, we are serious about the meaningful life for our coming generations. India this year is having the presidency of G20, and the focus is on Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, means universal familyhood. Coexistence with consideration and care for all is the very base of rich Indian culture. We cherish this rich legacy and traditions of brotherhood found in the Pasayadan, the universal prayer by Sant Dnyaneshwar, stating Bhuta Paraspare Pado Maitra Jivanche. India will surely show the path to the world amidst the climatic chaos and war in Europe. I thank you all for your meaningful presence here to discuss, to deliberate, and to discern on the Sustainable Development Goals, to introspect and suggest measures so that people on this planet will lead the progress with peace. Wishing you all the very best for a day-long deliberations. Thank you very much once again for your esteemed presence in this international conference. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now I request Dr. Tushar Rao in the capacity of convener to brief the academicians.
Good morning all. Respected as our college chairman, Archbishop Dr. Felix Machado, today's keynote speaker, Dr. Claudia Lang, our enthusiastic principal, Dr. Somnath Vibhute sir, Vice Principal, Professor Sarita Kurian, and dignitaries of the dais, our campus minister, Dr. Sachin Dabde sir, my dear colleague, and all friends, participants. Our college organized international conference in collaboration with ICSSR Western Region. So, it is a great honor for me to being a convener from our international committee, those all my colleagues who are contributed in wholehearted for this conference. So sustainable development is one of the defining challenges of our time as we strive to balance economic growth, social progress, environmental protection, We are here today because we recognize the critical importance of this issue and the need for collective action to ensure the sustainable development, and for future we are here. We all made great strides in recent years in our understanding of issues and the challenges that we face. We now have much clearer understanding for the complex interplay between economic, social, environmental factors and need to approach sustainable development in holistic and integrated manner. However, despite this progress, we are still facing numerous obstacles in our quest for sustainability. But we must not be discouraged. Instead, we must redouble our efforts and find new and innovative solutions to these challenges. We must work together to find ways to decouple economic growth from resource consumption and environmental degradation. We must invest in renewable energy, sustainable transportation, green infrastructure, and promote sustainable practice in our home, community, and businesses. We must tackle the root cause of poverty and inequality by providing access to education, healthcare, and economic opportunity for all. We must ensure that sustainable development benefits everyone, not just a privileged one. Ladies and gentlemen, the challenges of sustainable development is global one, and it requires a global response. We must work together across border, across sectors, and across generation to build a sustainable future for all. Let us use this conference as an opportunity to come together to share our experiences and our ideas and to build a stronger, more united and movement for the sustainability. Let us start this beginning from this conference and work together to build future for all. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I request Professor Elvina Joshi to introduce the chairperson of this conference as well as of this institute, His Grace Archbishop Dr. Felix Machado.
A warm good morning to one and all. The dignitaries on the stage, off the stage, and everyone present here. I am highly honored to introduce to you all the inaugurator of one-day multidisciplinary international conference. He doesn't require an introduction, as he is well-recognized figure in academics and spiritual world. He was born in Vasai, completed schooling in Vasai. He studied Indian and Western philosophy from St. Pius College, Mumbai. He is a licentiate in Christian theology from the Catholic Faculty of Theology, France. He completed Masters in Christian Theology from Maryknoll School of Theology, New York. He was awarded PhD from Fordham University, New York. He was a faculty staff at Hofstra University, USA from 1980 to 1984. He taught Indian philosophy and systematic dogmatic theology in St. Pius College, Mumbai from 1985 to 1993. He taught Christianity at KJ Somaiya Bharatiya Sanskriti Peetham, Mumbai in the year 1991. Numerous articles in various Indian and foreign journals of philosophy and theology in languages such as Marathi, English, French, and Italian are to his credit. He has authored 2 books, Path to Liberation and Journeying Together. The book Journeying Together is also published in Italian and French. He was also the editor of Pro Dialogue, a Vatican publication for dialogue with religions. Though his mother tongue is Marathi, he is well versed in other Indian and foreign languages too. He was Under Secretary at the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue at Pope's office at the Vatican City. He was appointed as Bishop of the Diocese of Nashik in January 2008 by Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI and ordained bishop in March 2008. Presently, he is the Archbishop of Versailles since December 2009. He has been chairperson for Office of Ecumenical and Interreligious Affairs of Federation of Asian Bishops' Conferences for 2 consecutive terms. He has been chairperson for Office of Interreligious Dialogue and the Desk for Ecumenism of the Catholic Bishops' Conference of India and chairperson for Commission of Ecumenism of Conference of Catholic Bishops of India. It's our privilege to have amongst us such a highly learned personality with varied interest and global experience. His Grace, Right Reverend Archbishop Dr. Felix Machado is the chairperson of our college, and in spite of his busy schedule, he always encourages us by being part of such events. My dear fellow colleagues, delegates, researchers, everyone present here, after listening to this biodata, who else could be the better person for today's multidisciplinary international conference on sustainable development? I request our principal, Dr. Somnath Vibhude, to welcome His Grace, Right Reverend Archbishop Dr. Felix Machado with a bouquet of flowers. Thank you, sir. Please be seated. Now I call upon Dr. Anil Sonavne to introduce the keynote speaker for the conference.
Thank you, Professor Albina. Today's keynote speaker, Professor Dr. Claudia Lang. She holds the chair of English Linguistics at the Technical University Dresden, Germany. Her main research interests are post-colonial Englishes with a focus on Indian English, contact linguistics, discourse pragmatic variation, and change and processes of standardization. Her publications include The Syntax of Spoken Indian English, published by Benjamins in 2012, and the textbook Corpus Linguistics for World Englishes, published with Sven Luker, published by Routledge 2020. A very enthusiastic teacher, a good academician who's interested in the field of linguistics and is quite famous among her students. Thank you. So now I request our Vice Principal, Professor Sarita Maan, to felicitate. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I request Dr. Arun Mai to welcome our ex-principal and present campus minister, Dr. Father Solomon Rodriguez, with Tulsi sapling.
Now I call upon our convener, Dr. Tushar Rao, to welcome our panelist, Dr. Sachin Lagde.
Thank you, sir. I now request His Grace, Right Reverend Archbishop Dr. Felix Machado to express his mind on this occasion.
परमेश्वराला प्रणाम करतो आणि जो परमेश्वर मी तुमच्यामध्ये बघतो त्या तुम्हा सर्वांना नमस्कार करतो. मुद्दामून मराठी बोलतो कारण आपण वसईला आहोत. हा महाराष्ट्र आहे. संपूर्ण भारतासाठी आणि संपूर्ण जगासाठी आपण हा प्रकल्प हाती घेतलेला आहे. परमेश्वराच्या आशीर्वादाने आपली इच्छा पूर्ण हो. Let me express my sincere appreciation to Dr. Somnath Vibhute, our dear principal, and his dynamic team of St. Gonsalo Garcia College of Arts and Commerce for organizing this international event. I also warmly welcome each and everyone here who has come to participate from near and far. Dear friends, the word sustainable in development is very important word. Sustainable. My question would be, is the earth quite simply not sustaining the enormous developmental potential of our species? Is it not perhaps designed at all for us to remain here in the long run? Or are we doing something wrong here? So, what is progress? How do we define progress today? The modern era has tried to find its way according to the fundamental concepts of progress and freedom. But what is progress? I ask again. Today we see that progress can also be destruction. In this regard, we should reflect on what criteria we must find so that progress really is progress. On the one hand, there was progress in knowledge. People understood this to mean comprehending reality. If we see the first pages of the Vedas, we find the root of the word Veda, Ved, comes from Vid. Jachatun mag Vidhyan. That is to know. Today, that has happened to an incredible extent through the combination of the mathematical world view and experimentation. As a result, we can reconstruct today DNA meaning the structure of life and in general the functional structure of reality. We can construct DNA to the point where by now we can partially copy it and already begin to manufacture life ourselves. But on the other hand, knowledge is power. That means if I know, then I can control. Knowledge brought power, but in such a way that with our own power, we can now also destroy the world that we think we have figured out intellectually. But we forgot the aspect of good. What is good? We will find the answer if we ask the question of intrinsic standards about what is good for man, what is good for woman, and what is good for the world. So the ethical aspect of which responsibility has been to a great extent been left out. Then when one's power is the only thing being advanced by one's knowledge, this sort of progress becomes destructive. Peace constitutes real happiness. peace. Man, woman may possess everything, health, wealth, wife and children, knowledge and skill, power and glory, but still, man, woman can be the most miserable creature if he is lacking that gift of the gods which does not depend on any other gift and on which all other gifts depend if they are to be real blessings for man and woman, that is peace. Human fullness is incomplete without peace, whereas even the one who lacks everything else can still have peace within him, within herself, and peace with all beings, which in fact constitutes happiness. All religions speak of peace to be closely related to the absolute mystery of God. I mentioned the Vedas. Vedas were deeply aware of this, and thus of the constant necessity to invoke peace with all the power of the mantra. For us Christians, for me, the incarnate Son of God, Jesus Christ, is the Prince of Peace, the giver of peace. Peace is received and nurtured in the hearts of men and women. We could say that the edifice of peace has its origin in human heart. Yet, peace does not remain only an individual concern. Like any good in this world, peace is diffusive of itself. There can be no peace in the human heart if there is no peace on earth. But conversely, there can be no earthly peace if there is discord in man's, in woman's inner being. The one affects the other. At the same time, both interact with the world of the gods in the same kind of double relationship. Nothing is achieved by external discord or internal unrest, and nothing is accomplished in the world or in human life unless it is grounded in peace. This is from Atharva Veda. So building peace cannot be just an individual's private project. All members of society need to be involved in building peace if we are to achieve real progress. The fundamental element for peace is the respect for the dignity of each and every human person. Then will follow basic foundation for peace, namely liberty, equality, justice, and fraternity. Justice is the moral virtue which demands from every human being respect for the rights of each and establishing human relationships of harmony that promote equity with regard to persons and with regard to the common good. One can name many other important elements which are necessary for building lasting peace, such as sustainable development, care for the planet Earth, our home, etc. And the circles can also be widened by adding elements of health, employment, etc. We all know what happened 2 years ago when in March 2020 our Prime Minister announced that there would be lockdown. The rest is history, but we seem to have forgotten everything. We still want to go our way of progress. I'm here to ring the bells. Peace on earth cannot be maintained unless the good of the human person is safeguarded and people are willing to trust each other and share their riches of spirit and talent. Respect of other persons and peoples and their dignity is indispensable for peace among all. Again, Corona COVID-19 taught us this. We were in the same boat, rich or poor, learned or unlearned. We were all in the same boat. Peace is work of justice and fruit of love. Peace is not the mere absence of war or the simple maintenance of a balance of power between forces, nor can it be imposed at the dictate of absolute power. Peace is work of justice, product of order, as people hunger and thirst for ever more perfect justice. Peace is the fruit of love, and love goes beyond what justice can achieve. All are called to live the truth in love and join works of peace. We must praise those who renounce violence in defense of rights and have recourse to means available without injury to the rights and obligations of others or of the community. So, re-educating ourselves and others for peace, re-educating. All must be involved in building peace by scrutinizing their own attitudes. Statesmen, responsible for the common good of society and their nation, must also take into account the well-being of the whole world. As long as there exist divisions in society, one against the other by feelings of hostility, contempt and distrust, by racial hatred or by inflexible ideologies, efforts for securing peace are of no avail. There is then a very great and urgent need to re-educate people and to provide fresh inspiration in the field of public opinion. Those engaged in education, for example, in our revered institution here, those engaged in education, especially among young people, and those who influence public opinion, should consider it very serious responsibility to work for the re-education of mankind to a new attitude towards peace. We must all undergo a change of heart. Each one must see what one can do for the human family. Yes, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. We must not be misled by false sense of hope. Unless antagonism and hatred are abandoned, unless binding and honest agreements are concluded, safeguarding universal peace in the future, the mankind already in grave peril may well face, in spite of its marvelous advance in knowledge and progress, that day of disaster when it knows no other peace than the awful peace of death. None of us want this. To build peace, the causes of human discord which feed the fires of war must be eliminated. And among these, especially the violations of justice must be eliminated. Many of these causes are due to gross economic inequality and delay in providing necessary remedies. Other causes arise from a spirit of domination and from a contempt for others. And among more fundamental causes, from human envy, distrust, pride, and other forms of selfishness. Even where war does not rage, the world is constantly plagued by human conflict of acts of violence. Violence to begin in the homes, violence in our surroundings, violence sometimes even in our state and country. And what about relations between nations? This is an international seminar here. It is necessary that international institutions should cooperate more effectively, more resolutely, and with greater coordination of effort in order to prevent evils and check acts of violence. Making efforts to build peace today, we do not believe in separating the economic from the human, nor development from the civilization, in which it exists. What we must hold important is man is woman. Each man and each woman, each group of men and women, and we even include the whole of humanity. Human beings cannot live, develop, and find fulfillment except in the sincere gift of self to others. Bhutadaya, yes. Nor can they fully know themselves apart from an encounter with other persons. No one can experience the true beauty of life without relating to others, without having real faces of love. The introduction of technology is a necessity for economic growth and human progress. Yes. It is also a sign of development and contributes to it. But it is unfortunate that on these new conditions of society, a system has been constructed which considers profit as the key motive for economic progress. Sad. Competition as the supreme law of economics, and private ownership of the means of production as an absolute right that has no limits and carries no corresponding social obligation. Similarly with work, employment. While it can sometimes be given exaggerated significance, it is for all something willed and blessed by God. I have gone through this when I was a volunteer in refugee camps in Bangladesh, on the borders of India and Bangladesh, 71, 72. It was not people crying for food. Yes, for sometimes they did that. We were providing food for them. They had no work. They were bored. So work of course can have contrary effects, for it promises money, pleasure and power, invites some to selfishness, others to revolt. It also develops professional awareness, sense of duty and charity towards one's neighbor. But there is also a risk of its dehumanizing those who perform that work. Dehumanizing. By making them its servants, for work is human only if it remains intelligent and free. We need to develop the awareness that nowadays we are either all saved together or no one will be saved. Poverty, decadence, and suffering in one part of the earth are silent breeding ground for problems that will end up affecting the entire planet. I am not a prophet of doom, I am a prophet of hope. But I must remind myself of all this. Putting under carpet will serve nobody. Although 20th century has put an end to the period of colonialization, but their place was taken by neo-colonization. Today, social conflicts have taken on world dimensions. There is also the scandal of glaring inequalities, not merely in the enjoyment of possessions, but even more in the exercise of power. Furthermore, the conflict between traditional civilizations and the new elements of technological civilization in certain regions, the remainder of population, poor and scattered, vistapit. The migrants, deprived of nearly all possibility of personal initiative and of responsibility, and oftentimes even living and working conditions are unworthy of the human person. In effect, the moral, spiritual and religious supports of the past too often give way without securing in return any guarantee of a place in the new world. There are also new types of messianism. Messianism which gives promises but creates only illusions. And ecological concern. Dear friends, ecological concern is an urgent imperative. Value that is directly related to the environment is that of the universal destination of created goods. This is what Saint Pope John Paul II had said. It is manifestly unjust that a privileged few should continue to accumulate excess goods, squandering available resources, while masses of people are living in conditions of misery at the very lowest level of subsistence. Today, the dramatic threat of ecological breakdown is teaching us that the extent to which greed and selfishness, both individual and collective selfishness, are contrary to the order of creation and in order that is characterized by mutual interdependence. Today, we are becoming more and more aware that injustice done even to the Mother Earth has adverse, even mortal repercussions on our life as human beings. We cannot close our eyes to the crisis of deterioration of Mother Earth. She is crying. The tropics are expanding. The sea level is rising. The poles are melting. Holes in the ozone layer are no longer closing up. We are experiencing tragedies of floods, periods of droughts, air pollution. Talk of Bombay in 1 week. The most polluted city was Bombay in the world. Twice in 1 week. Shortage of clean water. Yes, the wars in future will be fought for this purpose. The condition of the planet Earth is extremely at risk, said the Secretary General of the United Nations. Only a few decades remain for mankind until a point of no return, where it is too late to gain control of the problem of the high-tech world on our own. Some experts from various fields even consider that we have already reached that point of no return. There are certainly situations whose injustice cries to heaven. When whole populations destitute of necessities live in a state of dependence, barring them from all initiative and responsibility and all opportunity to advance culturally and share in social and political life, recourse to violence as a means to right these wrongs to human dignity is a great temptation. I come to my conclusion. Just want to remind you, this is Palghar Jilla. We as Taluka of Vasai are part of Palghar Jilla. And Palghar Jilla, I do not know if there is any other Jilla declared officially by the government as Adivasi Jilla. Who are these Adivasis? There can be no progress, my dear friends, towards the complete development of man, woman, without the simultaneous development of all humanity in the spirit of solidarity. Pope Paul VI came to Bombay in 1964. The first Pope to travel in this part of the world. This is in 1964. And what did he say to a group of inter-religious dialogue? There were Shankaracharyas. I was a young man, but I was following all this. And I met some of them. Pandurang Shastri Athavale of Swadhyay was one of the participants who treated me like his son, and he told me many things. What he said is this, I quote, "Man must meet man." Man here is man, woman. Man must meet man, nation meet nation as brothers and sisters. We meet, but we don't meet as brothers and sisters. We must meet as children of God, all children of God, in this mutual understanding and friendship, in this sacred communion. We must also begin to work together to build the common future of the human race. Common future, my dear friends, not individual future. COVID-19, how many times it has to come? Again it should come to remind us that all are in the same boat. There is only common future, there is no individual future. We must search for concrete and practical ways of organization and cooperation, as it was said, so that all available resources be pooled and thus a true communion among all nations be achieved. The same Pope Paul VI in 64 in Bombay said he wanted to have a world fund, kind of for worldwide collaboration, so that there would be a common future for all. And so I pray, O God of peace, who are peace itself, and whom a spirit of discord cannot grasp, nor a violent mind receive, grant that those who are one in heart may persevere in what is good, and that those in conflict may forget evil and so be healed. Jai Hind, Jai Maharashtra.
Thank you, Your Grace, for reminding us that peace is necessary for human race as well as sustainable development. Thank you. Now I request our keynote speaker to present her ideas. Professor Dr. Claudia Lam. Dear audience, dear dignitaries now out of the dais, thank you very much. Thank you very much, dear colleagues, dear friends, dear researchers. Yeah. Thank you very much for this invitation. I'm particularly grateful for the opportunity to come back to this college. I've been here once before, and thank you, Anil, for giving me the opportunity to think about what I, as a linguist, can contribute to such an important topic, a topic that His Grace has again brought to bear upon us. So what I would like to talk about today is, what is the UN Sustainable Agenda? And of course, as a linguist, as somebody who's involved in English language, I would like to talk mainly about quality education. This is where I would feel most familiar with. And I would like to show you what I, as a linguist, what linguistics with its theoretical, I'm mainly a theoretical linguist, I'm not involved in English language teaching, what we, from our knowledge, can bring upon those goals of living together, communicating with each other for quality education. So it's about language and sustainability. It's also about the big question, which is always going through all discussions I hear about education. What do we do about it? Sorry. Okay. What do we do about, what is English? Is it a killer language or is it an international resource? So we will briefly look at how this is implemented in Indian education. Please interrupt me if I'm saying something which is totally silly because you know much better. But we will have discussion at the end. And what are the global English trends? What is going on in English worldwide? Whose English is it? And we will end with my outlook.
But before I start, I would like to say there's one day next year which we shouldn't celebrate because it's a so-called Earth Overshoot Day. So this year, on July 27th, is the day when we have used up all the resources of the Earth already. The interesting thing, and this is something I, as a member of an industrialized nation, have to keep in mind, this is of course not equal across the world. When you see this diagram, I don't know whether you can read it, so here is, somewhere here is Germany. So here's Qatar. So Qatar will have used up its Earth, or the Earth, already by February 10th. I think Germany is somewhere here. Can't read it exactly. No, here's Germany. So Germany will have used up, the average German will have used up the Earth on May 4. And when you're trying to crane your neck, and when you're looking for India, when you're looking for Bangladesh or Pakistan, it's not on the map. Because India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, these countries live sustainably. They just use the resources that they have. But then this can't be, yes. But then this is of course a tension there. This is because millions of people in India, in Pakistan and also the Philippines live without electricity. So this is not what everybody wants. You can't tell everybody live like the people in India. This is not. On the contrary, we have to tell ourselves, members of industrial countries, cut back on consumptions, find solutions. So the industrialized countries have created the problem, so we have a higher responsibility for also tackling the problem. So we have to contribute by sharing our resources in terms of knowledge and in terms of technology, and we have to find ways to support those who want to be lifted, understandably lifted out of poverty. That can only be communal solutions. And even though we're still using way more resources, we as members of industrialized societies, than we should, there is hope. So this year, for the first time, the European Union will use more energy out of renewable resources than of fossil fuel. So we are very aware of that time is running out, as Grace has reminded us. So we will not celebrate this day, but we should, or I definitely will keep it in mind. When we look at the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, as I said, so the one I'm I think most qualified to talk about, but they all go together, as you reminded us as well. So education is the key to so many things. Education is the key to equality, is the key to a better life. So the UNESCO has said that everywhere where there's education, specifically education on an equal level for men and women, this more or less automatically leads to a better life for the whole population. But if you look specifically at education, this is again what the UN says, what is this quality education? Ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning for all. And learning, this has to do something with language. So when we talk about languages and language learning, this is now from the website of the UNESCO. What are languages? What can language do for us? I keep saying that language is what makes us humans. So animals can communicate, but only humans can make jokes, have social interactions, write poetry, talk about the past, worship their gods. So this is typically human. So we are made to communicate. So this is why the UNESCO says language is a carrier of human heritage in identity, historical, cultural, and linguistic material. So it's a repository of what we are as human beings. So as it says here again, a knowledge repository system. It's a system for communicating, but it's also a resource for our advancement as a species, individual and jointly. And what I would like to do is now, as a linguist, say, what is language? So what do we know about language? There are some general ideas about language around, so which are shared by many, but which are actually not true. So we have to be aware, or I think it is my responsibility as a linguist to say something about what languages are and what they are not. So I'm going to talk about some myths about language and language learning. One myth is that we use language mainly for communication. If you talk to people from computer sciences or from informatics, they probably say, oh yeah, we have these languages. So I know a language, Python or something, computer languages. But this is not human. So a natural language is vague, we make mistakes, we misunderstand each other, but natural languages are also so rich And it's actually the minimum amount of time every day we just exchange information. The main function of language is social. By coming in here today and saying hello, good morning to you, I'm not communicating to you the fact that it's morning, I'm greeting you, I'm establishing a social relation. So the actual content is not the important thing, it's the establishing of a bond. So just check yourself how many times a day you actually exchange a piece of information, or how many times you may create a social bond. What I will talk a little bit in more detail is about this common idea that some languages or dialects are better than others. I hear from people that the Marathi spoken in Mumbai is Gutta Marathi. If you want to hear proper Marathi, you have to go to Pune. Is that right? Is that what people say? It used to be like this. So even making this distinction, there's a good Marathi or a better Marathi or dialects of Marathi, but I will come back to that. This entails that perhaps some speakers are better than others because they speak the more proper dialect, because they are English medium educated. So this is a very important point that we have to put into perspective. There's also this idea, I find that in my country, Germany, some people violently object to English loanwords in English. They say the language should be pure. But there is no pure language. We always are in contact with other speakers. If people object to English loanwords, they are for some reason conspicuously quiet about the loanwords from Latin or Greek, or from French. We have so many of them, and words come and go. Languages can never be pure. Then some more myths, that this idea that there should be exactly one language which unites the nation, so one language, one nation, that this is somehow natural. So in a very, very multilingual country with a very rich millennia-old tradition of multilinguality or multiculturalism, I perhaps do not have to stress this that much, but I come from a mostly monolingual country, and I have to impress upon people one language, one nation is an historical idea which actually originated in the West. I'm going to tell you something a little bit more about it. Then again, something which might sound funny for you, but this was a very prevalent idea in the West, namely that multilingualism is bad for you. It's bad for your brain. So if kids grow up with many languages, so their little brains can't handle it. You know it's not true, but in the Western context I have to stress that. And then this one question, is English a killer language? In what sense? There are some linguistic human rights activists who say, coined the concept of killer language. This is something I would like to talk about. So, in general, let's look at language and language discrimination.
No voice, please check it.
So, from a linguistic point of view, I'm fully aware that there are non-standard dialects, and in a school or college context, you have to teach the standard, you will teach English. But from a linguistic point of view, languages and dialects are simply more or less appropriate. So if you use a specific minority language, you might use it in the home, perhaps not in your workplace. If you use a non-standard dialect, if you use youth slang, slang is a very important thing. Slang is an in-group language, so it's typically related to younger people. So, and of course, if people get older, they may use different slang words, but this is an in-group language which creates a sense of identity. And if you use your slang amongst
Anita madam,
yourself,
please, आवाज नहीं आ रहा है, check करिए.
that will be fine, but you will not use it to address your professor.
Online.
So from a linguistic point of view, differences between languages and dialects are about appropriateness. And there's one very famous definition from a Norwegian linguist called Einar Haugen, and he said, when we talk about a standard language, standard Hindi, standard Marathi, standard English, a standard is basically marked by what he called minimal variation in form, but maximal variation in function. So a standard language is the neutral variety which you would use to somebody or with somebody you do not know, which you would typically use in writing. And another word or expression from a German linguist is the language of distance. So for example, for writing, again, for more formal communication. But the standard is not intrinsically better than anything else. It's just more appropriate for more situations than, for example, slang or your family language. So this is why this same German linguist called Did you disconnect this? Can you please reconnect my this is no longer working. Sorry for that. So the non-standard dialects, they have their functions. So you will, if you travel and you find somebody speaking the same language or the same dialect to you, you immediately feel a bond. So it's a language of immediacy. When we talk about some languages being better than others, we're talking about the prestige of a language. The prestige of a language is not because the language is better, because their speakers have more prestige. So there might be an upper strata in a society which sets the standards, but a language is never better or worse than any other language. So a language is never, or dialect is never dysfunctional. And the interesting thing is from research, for example, in the United Kingdom, we know that there's a tendency for democratization. So the hallowed standard of teaching English as a foreign language, RP, received pronunciation, is actually less popular. We know that about 3% of people actually speak RP in the UK. But it's now considered a bit snobbish, a bit too upper class, so there's a tendency to go away in UK speech, away from RP and to some variety which is called estuary English. I'm not going into detail with that, but this is a very interesting trend. And when we now look at further linguistic means, what can we do to elevate the status of specific languages? You know that better than I do, there are so many languages which have very low prestige. Perhaps they're spoken by very small communities, deprived communities. There are many languages which do not even have a written form, which is in today's time. I know that in India, languages were not written. Sanskrit was not a written language for thousands of years. But today, this seems to be something imported from the West. Unless a language has a written form, it is vulnerable. So what can you do in terms of language policy and planning? So there is something like status planning, and Sachin pointed me to the new educational policy of 2020, and there are a lot of efforts for planning for the prestige or function of language. So you can, for example, think about what should be the language of instruction in school, or what should be the language of administration. So these are elements of status planning. I think the National Educational Plan that also makes some provisions for having academies, something like that, for creating experts for specific languages. Another important point is what is called corpus planning. So many languages, as I said, lack a written form, so they might need a dictionary, they might need a grammar. So this helps them in terms of their prestige. Further, there is acquisition planning. For example, which languages do you use in second and foreign language learning? So do you adhere to the 3-language formula? Do you give more emphasis on foreign Western languages or on other languages which are spoken in Asia? And of course, there's also language maintenance. Those of you who speak a minority language may have a choice to pass it on to their children. Some of you might not do this for particular reasons, but the language maintenance begins at home. These are important points. Once a language gets lost, it may also be revitalized. So for example, right now, Americans of Chinese origin are revitalizing their Chinese, they're relearning it. Okay, so prestige is a very important point. When we look at this other point that I talked about, this one language, one nation, what I call positive nationalism, so this is my term, I keep telling my students, saying that one language or nation needs one language was an idea that originated in Western Europe, and it was very strong in Germany. It was a very progressive idea at the time. It has to do with the Brothers Grimm. I don't know whether you're familiar with Grimm's fairy tales. And this very art of collection of fairy tales was a political project. So the Grimms were growing up in a Germany which didn't exist at the time as a united country. It existed with little dukedoms and kingdoms, and their idea was to have a unified Germany. And their ideas were influenced by Romanticism. So they said, we all speak the same language, so this is why we should be one people. And this language somewhere embodies our national character. So every German-speaking person should live in one country. So national unity was actually a progressive, anti-feudalist idea. And they were working in Marburg, a small place in Germany at the time. They were actually kicked out of university there. They had to flee first to Kassel and then to Berlin. So they had a very, very political agenda. And this collection of fairy tales that they did was part of that. They wanted to get the people's language. So they listened to washerwoman, fisherwoman, so they listened to the average person and said, this is the most authentic German. It's not spoiled by education. So they had this very romantic ideas. And this kind of positive nationalism is linked to the idea that in order to be a fully participating member of a democratic society, so they were Democrats, they said, then we need one common. To look at is a quote from the first Prime Minister of Singapore, who said, we must never allow race, language, religion to dominate our politics because it will bring the struggle between the poorer Malay indigenous community and the richer Chinese merchants, different languages, different religions. And on the background of this struggle, he said, we do not want that. And Singapore, to this day, keeps a very equitable policy. They have 4 national languages. They have Mandarin Chinese, Tamil, English, and Malay as the national languages. They have a lot of censorship. They have film censorship. So, for example, you cannot say anything negative about any religion, whether it's racial, interracial, unity. If you go to Chinatown in Singapore, right on the edge of Chinatown, there's the next Hindu temple. So this goal has been achieved, and I must say I am very impressed. So please take away from this, if you try to suppress a language or a community, it never works. It gives you grievances that will fester for generations to come. And suppressing a language or language conflicts are never language conflicts, they're always social conflicts. So language is just a rallying point. So multilingualism is obviously a good thing. And I have to tell my students, you might know that around the world, multilingualism is the norm rather than the exceptions. You could say this one language, one nations policy in Europe has been so strong, and unfortunately has been exported from the 19th century onwards to many then colonial countries and then post-colonial countries. That this idea that only one language is okay became very prevalent. And when I did some research on multilingualism, I found, and I was very happy to see, and you should be happy because you're all multilingual, it has a lot of advantages. Cognitively, I was quite surprised, I didn't know that. So first of all, everybody who knows 2 or 3 languages already will find it very easy to learn another 2. So you have this kind of meta-linguistic awareness to begin with, and then that's a good thing. So I'm already looking to get older. It is proven that people who are multilinguals, that in case they suffer from dementia, it will come later. So even for me, I learned English as a foreign language, so there's a good chance that if I have dementia, it will come perhaps a little bit later. So this is a kind of cognitive reserve that you build out. And this is only talking about the immediate benefits to a language learning environment, but this is nothing, we have not even touched upon the social and cultural benefits. Remember in the very beginning, it says languages are repositories of our identity, of cultural heritage and knowledge. And if you have access to more than one, if you have access to 3 or 4 of these repositories, this of course makes you individually a richer person, and it makes the whole society richer, because there's more diversity. And then this brings us to the very important question, what about English in this setup? What about English? Let's talk about India as a post-colonial country. There are other post-colonial countries where this may play a role. And there's one linguist, a Danish linguist. I like this picture. It's from her website. She's retired now, obviously enjoying her life, and this means something this means happy birthday, I think, in several Kurdish dialects. So this was given to her. And she is very vocal about killer languages. This concept has frequently been applied to English as right now the most important global lingua franca, but she's talking about it in a very general term, that out for you. Languages are today disappearing at a faster pace than ever before in human history. What happens in linguistic genocide on a massive scale, with formal education and media as the main concrete culprits, but with the world's political, economic, and military structures as the more basic causal factors. Big languages turn into killer languages, monsters that gobble up others when they are learned at the cost of the smaller ones. Instead, they should and could be learned in addition to the various mother tongues. So at the end, she's a little bit more, going softer. So she's not only talking about the killer languages, says they don't have to be killer languages. They should be learned or can be learned at least alongside others. And this idea of a killer language, somebody who was, very decisive about this is, of course, somebody you know much better than I do. So Gandhi's language policy was against English. From the 20s onwards, he said we should get rid of, as we successfully banished the political rule of the English reserve. The highest development of the Indian mind must be possible without the knowledge of English. And you know better than I do that he campaigned not for Hindi, for Hindustani. So for Hindustani, he went around, he told the brothers and sisters in the south, if we want to achieve unity as a nation, we need one language. And you could say in that sense, he was a positive nationalist. He said, especially women who have less access to education at his time, so how can are less likely to know English at the time. So in order to achieve a democratic society, we need a common language, and this should be Hindustani. So you could say he was, from my perspective, he was a positive nationalist. It didn't turn out that way, as you know. And if you look at this on a global scale, the only countries, whether they were formerly ruled by the French or the English or the Portuguese or the Spanish, the only country worldwide which has not kept a colonial language is Tanzania in Africa. So Tanzania has opted for Kiswahili as their national language. Doesn't mean nobody speaks English in the country, it's an important tourism hotspot, so English is a foreign language for tourism. Malaysia has tried to go to Malay, sorry, then went back to English and so on. But there must be a reason. Got one here, sorry. So there must be a reason why all these countries who all had discussions similar to what Gandhi said, they all had discussions, what do we do? There must be a reason that Mozambique and Angola in Africa have kept Portuguese. South Africa has 11 national languages, one of them English, but English has a very important status, or French-speaking African places, Portuguese and Spain in Southern America. There must be a reason why they've all kept the access to, or all kept the foreign, further colonial language. And one spokesman for keeping this language is Chinua Achebe. You might know him, very important Nigerian writer, and when he already wrote that in 1965, when there was a discussion on what should he write. Should he write in his native language Igbo? So Igbo is one of the big languages of Nigeria. We also have Yoruba and Hausa, and there are also so many other languages, so it's very multilingual. So he said, if I want to read what my colleague in the north of Nigeria writes, unless he writes in English, I will not read it. I will not be able to read it. If I want to become part of the International Society of Writers, then English will be the best language. So the English language will be able to carry the weight of my African experience, and the highlight is from me, so this will have to be a new English. Still in full communion with its ancestral home, but altered to suit its new African surroundings. So where Gandhi was of the opinion, English, you cannot be free and speak English at the same time. Chinua Achebe and others would say, we can, but we have to make it our English. And it has clear benefits. It connects us even within our country, so we can use it as an intra-national language and an international language. And for him, that was more important, and he didn't see this problem of being colonized as severely as Gandhi says, or we just take English and make it fit our purposes. And when we now look at English, so in what kind of English we teach, when you're interested in global English, there is this model by the late Raj Kachru, who's a linguist, you could say, who put Indian English on the map. He says there are 3 circles of English. The inner circle is English as a native language. The outer circle is English as a second language, for example, in India. And the expanded circle is where English is learned as a foreign language. For us, for everybody who uses English, the question is which teaching models? Should we use the teaching models from the inner circle, from Britain, from America? Should we create our own? Should there be Indian English, Malaysian English, Singapore English? So where do we go? The important point to notice is that the inner circle English speakers here, so this is, as you can see, this is from 2003, which will mean this is a long time ago, 20 years ago. So the inner circle is shrinking, the outer circle, and definitely the expanding circle is growing. So there are more outer circle English as a second language speakers on this planet than there are inner circle speakers. And when we now look at this important point is how to deal with English in education, and if you want to use the shortcut, Abhimanyu Sharma is a researcher from Delhi University. He just wrote a very short paper where he tries to sum up the state of affairs. This is something I would be interested to talk with you about, whether you share this opinion. He says there are basically 2 points. There's the instrumentality approach, where English is seen as a means of socioeconomic mobility for disadvantaged communities. Others have written and said English can be an instrument of decolonizing, specifically disadvantaged communities, can show upward social mobility, can leave their deprived surroundings by having access to English. The other side would be the identity approach, which says that English medium instruction leads to cultural alienation of school children and proposes mother tongue-based multilingual education as the alternative. And if you look, for example, this is a map from the ASA report from 2010. I'm sure you're familiar with this report. I think, so this is 2010, again, quite old. I'm sure I think the latest ASA has been out. Of course, it couldn't take place every year because of COVID. But red here means this is the proportion of rural children in class 8 who can read and understand simple sentences in English, and that means less than 25%. Green means more than 75% of rural, so we're not talking about urban context, but you see the highlights where rural children are very well served in English. This is Kerala, these are eastern states, Himachal Pradesh, and also between individual states. And we all know that you refer to COVID, the schools have been closed for more than a year, and I think only those who have access to online education, and this will, in a way, disregard millions of rural school children. So it is estimated that in the developing countries, COVID put back the clock for the developing countries for more than 5 years. So this is something we all have to keep in mind. It might affect us differently depending on where we teach, but this is something we have to keep in mind. So if you look at this idea that English is not a good thing, specifically when we look at rural children or children from linguistic communities, one important researcher whom you probably also know very well, Ajit Mohanty, continues to talk about the double divide in Indian multilingualism. He says, if we have indigenous tribal minority languages, and you're saying certainly on Adivasi land here, then first of all, they have to learn the local regional language. So the first divide between the major state language, in this case Marathi, and the Adivasis. And it's also something where we could contradict Tourist Gutnav Kangas. English is internationally not really the killer language. And the Indian researcher Anvita Abhi, who works a lot on tribal languages, says the killer language for tribals is the larger state language. So if tribal communities, if minority communities do language shift, then it is towards the state language. doesn't make things any better. So this is first the vernacular tribal minority language versus the major state language, and then the dominant language, that may be English. So the double divide is a double disadvantage for children from poorer, from tribal minorities. So he says there are also a lot of low quality English medium schools, that the craze for English is so high that specifically parents from, disadvantaged socio-economic backgrounds, they want English at any cost, but they wouldn't be able to distinguish between a low quality and a high quality English medium school, but they also would not be able to pay for a high quality English medium school. So he says, what can be the solution? We need somehow multilingual education. We cannot leave these children behind. So quality education has to be for all. On the other hand, a researcher, but she's not an educator, this is something I'm still trying to figure out what is the right model, perhaps you can help me there. Another researcher, Shubha Satanya from the University of Delhi, she says, English has not replaced the local languages. So this is from a research project in 2015, but it may have replaced literacy in regional languages in major urban areas to a considerable extent due to rising English education. So that would mean, perhaps those of you who are in this college, perhaps you write more in English than you write more in Marathi. So I would be interested to hear your comments on that. But she insists, she says there's still this multilingual ethos in India, so it's still pluralistic. So without necessarily competing. So her model is more of a circle, whereas Mohanty is more of a pyramid. I don't know, I have no overall, how could I? I mean, I'm a visitor, I'm a stray visitor like a migrant bird. But this is probably something you might tell me more about. I would like to, I think everybody would agree, multilingual education is a good thing, it's good for your brain, you heard that. And colleagues of mine who are at the University of Hyderabad, Professor Dina Mukhopadhyay has been working on a large research project, multilingual literacy and languages, right? So this has been a huge research project, and this is one research project that's the logo, has been sponsored by Cambridge University Press and UK universities, and they sent around researchers looking in Delhi, Patna, Hyderabad, and they included research in schools in slum and non-slum areas. This is a huge research project, and I think it's a very good example of where the multilingual ethos and the multilingual experience of India will influence international language learning policies, even in the monolingual West. So the experience that can be gained from India will also be used in the West. Because the Western countries, I said Germany is a monolingual country, it's not quite true. We have more than 1 million refugees from Ukraine. We have more than, we are a small country, we have 80 million inhabitants, 1 million recent refugees from Ukraine. We have 6 million people of Turkish origin. We have a couple of million people speaking Arabic. And there's a concept about Europe, this concept of super diversity. So recent migration brings more and more people from very, very diverse backgrounds together. So if we want it or not, we have to acknowledge we are no longer a monolingual country, and we need strategies to bring everybody into the fold of education. And I would recommend that you actually look up this project. They have textbooks, they have videos, they have policy recommendations. I just give you 3. So one recommendation is, first of all, and you might think, oh, big deal, I knew that forever, but the use of the child's home language in the classroom is very beneficial. If you read from their projects, they say specifically kids from slum, they are no dumber, they've been tested. They might not know the state language, they speak a tribal language, but just being from a slum and not growing up in a literate household doesn't make kids dumber. Again, we have to think about, what is the prestige of speakers, what is the prestige of languages? Where does the prestige of somebody who grows up in a literate household comes from? It's a social prestige, it's not because the language is better. So I think one of the key points, and you stressed it already, Your Grace, is respect for other people's dignity. So people in slum areas are not what they say, they are not deficient. They have so many resources. And if you tap these resources, they're multilingual resources, they will be very good learners and strive towards a better future. Point is, of course, teachers need training. Teachers need ideas on how to deal with this kind of multilingualism. There's always this argument to say, well, if you come to a classroom and there are 5 different languages, what can you do? Or let's say 20 different languages, what can you do as a teacher? You can't learn them all. You might know 5, but not all of them. So teachers need help, they need support, and this project is one way of developing materials for them. And it's a direct quote: school systems need to recognize the resilience that children from disadvantaged contexts develop. It is important to build classroom practices on the strength of the urban and rural poor. So, as I said, some children are not deficient, they show more resilience in many ways. So, but what English to teach if you want to teach English? Just what is happening to English right now. I just want to give you some overview of what my colleagues who are interested in English around the world, what we are working on. I think I know at least 2 of my colleagues. Edgar Schneider is someone who wrote a famous book on post-colonial Englishes. And interestingly, 2 of my colleagues are actually roaming Namibia now. So Namibia is one of the hotspots of linguistic activity, and you may wonder why. Namibia only became independent in 1990 following the end of the apartheid regime in South Africa. And Namibia, on the southwest African coast, is a multilingual country. It was in the beginning of the 20th century, it was colonized by Germany, short and brutal history, but then it was never colonized by an English-speaking country, but it has decided in 1990 for English to be the sole official language. And why is that interesting for linguists? So we can see this is the birth of a new official language. So what will it do? It's nobody's language in the country. So in the sense there's no sizable community who speaks English. So there's nobody who will perhaps have more prestige than the other. So we will see how is this developing, how will this language become nativized in a context like Namibia. As I said, my friends are roaming the country and see what's going to happen. Will there be different dialects, depending on, you have black people from different areas, you have white people, you have South Africans and so on and so on. Will there be different dialects? What's going to happen? Then Schneider says this idea of hybrid English, as you may perhaps know, Hinglish, Hindi and English. There's also a nice book a little bit older called Chutneyfying English on hybrid dialects. And Schneider stresses, of course, this is not something we would teach. We also don't have to teach that because everybody can do it. He finds that in India, he finds that in Korea, Japan, and other countries. And he says, what is so very interesting that this is not a bad kind of English, but it may be the expression of a new identity, of a new bilingual, multilingual identity. He says it's typically found among the young urban population, and they stress that they are more than the sum of the parts of these languages. So they stress their multilingual and multicultural identity by doing that. And then he says English is used not only on a highly proficient level, but it's used across the world when people just try to get by, and he uses this term transnational attraction. And he gives some examples for that. So on the one hand, let's say you are young and you happen to be interested in rap music. So I still have to find this movie Gully Boy, I think it's about rap music. If you're interested in rap music, you might be listening to American rap. I heard that K-pop is extremely influential in Sri Lanka, so they have festivals celebrating K-pop. So we have Korean pop singers singing in English being celebrated in Sri Lanka. So we have globalization. And we can have access to people from somewhere in the globe within a second on our cell phones. So perhaps this idea of a national variety of English is no longer that relevant. So languages cross borders in cyberspace. There may be new communities developing new language practices which are not tied to specific nations and which do not really care about grammaticalness. It's all about being able to manage. So this is some kind of grassroots English where he says, you know, this is growing and we should look at that. That is very interesting. So in general, and this is again, this comes back to what Chinua Achebe said about the kind of English he wants to write. He wants to write his own new English, which can carry his African experience. So perhaps we're not looking at global English versus local English. Perhaps these two go together and we have some kind of local English. And here's another quote from Edgar Schneider's paper. He says, this transnational attraction may be about non-standard ways of using English just to get by, to, you know, the instrumental function of English. But he says even a global kind of English can have an identity function. So there are also signs that English will be able to transcend such economic motivations and become a multicultural resource dissociated from Western and English-American cultural context in the long run. So, say, today we have the chance to create in English, or English maybe not doing what Gandhi accused it of doing, so in a way reminding you constantly of the colonial experience, or in a way stopping you from realizing your potential as a specific human being because it imposes alien values upon us. But it may be that this is in the long run a process which opens new roles to the language and may thus strengthen its long-standing role. And from my experience, I would support that, but I would be interested in what you say, that English can be not only instrumental, but also identity carrying within your particular community. So may use it and not be reminded of American superiority or of British colonialism, and create your own English and use it. And what we in my country are now discussing, what model of English to teach. Do we teach British English? Do we teach American English? I keep asking my students, when you learned English at school, was it British or American English? So for the longest time, the German teaching model was British English. Now it's also American English, and some even say, I don't really care, I didn't notice. So the point is, perhaps a native kind of English is no longer the cultural norm. And there is this, I love the abbreviation, the ELF, so makes you think of Harry Potter. English as a lingua franca, the abbreviation is ELF. And now ELF used to be seen as, you know, just getting by, so in a way getting bad German English and bad Swedish English and bad French English, and this is then ELF. This is not the case. So today, ELF, English as a lingua franca, by, for example, Jennifer Jenkins, who is a famous researcher, that she says English is part of a multilingual repertoire. English as a lingua franca means we exchange or we talk to each other in English when we don't have any other language in common. And of course, we are all multilingual. And when people communicate in ELF, in Europe we have the European Union sponsors an exchange program called Erasmus. So we also call it Erasmus English for that respect. As I said, people from Spain, from Sweden or other countries communicate. This is something you would not have in an Indian context, but we also talk something called the Erasmus babies, you know, coming out of fruitful unions between people. And in ELF communication, I know that you speak different language. That means if you say something which I don't know, then I think you're translating directly from your language, but we will try to understand each other, we'll accommodate each other. So we'll find a common ground. So it's about communicative efficiency. And the interesting thing, there are studies about that. If there is an English native speakers within an ELF communication, this then doesn't work as well, because the English native speaker, if he or she is monolingual, she doesn't have this metalinguistic awareness. She might use proverbs that only she knows, coming from Britain or Scotland or the UK or New Zealand, and we as ELF speakers who probably either not know the proverbs or avoid them because we think since you might not know them, we stick to a different level. So this may be a way forward, even in our countries, my country, to more go for ELF and not cling like a slave to some kind of native teacher. Okay, so this is what I can contribute from a linguistic perspective to the question of language. What can language and linguistics bring to sustainable development? And if I just draw a conclusion in terms of outlook. When we talk about multilingualism, multilingualism begins and it also ends at home. That's the important point. So if you speak of a minority language, when we look at the UNESCO classification of what is an endangered language, and language becomes endangered if it's not passed on in the family. The typical pattern for language loss is the parents speak it, the children only understand it passively but do not speak it anymore for whatever reason. They may have good reasons. You can't force a language on everybody. If your children do not want to carry on your legacy, there may be reasons, maybe societal pressure. Again, this is where we have to do some status planning, add more prestige to these speakers. And then typically the third generation, the language is lost. So multilingualism begins and ends at home. Schools have a responsibility, but the home is where is the very locus of multilingualism. So if you're multilingual already, you know that, just repeating, then it's easier for you to learn another language. Multilingualism fosters intercultural understanding and preserves our cultural heritage. And in that sense, what we have as biological diversity is also an extremely important resource. So linguistic diversity, as all kinds of diversity, fosters resilience. So if we were all one, then we would have only one solution for all the problems. But if we all bring our different perspectives, which are embodied in our languages, we were bound to find better solutions. And of course, it will be easier for us if we speak different languages to communicate with each other. And if you look at other points that I've mentioned, so I am personally strongly in favor of a positive kind of nationalism, a democratic, participatory kind of nationalism. And this nationalism just means I'm proud, but it doesn't mean I degrade anybody else. So we can be different without saying my difference makes anybody any better or worse. And this, I think, would be very, very beneficial. Otherwise, you mentioned it, Your Grace, we do not have that much time left, and if we squander it with saying my country is better than your country, and I will not talk to you, then we squander an important opportunity. So, and I think the very motto of India is unity in diversity. In that sense, respect and resilience for all speakers and cultures as embodied in their language is a very important thing. I try to teach my students at home, and I hope they actually listen to me. And I'm not as negative as some. I quoted here, for example, Ajit Mohanty about English. I wouldn't be here talking to you if I couldn't do it in English. So respect, and English belongs to all its speakers and users. I will not let anybody tell me how to use my English, whether it's somebody from the inner circle or from somewhere else. I use it as I see fit. That doesn't mean I'm against standards, but as I said, the standard language can be appropriate. In other contexts, the non-standard language may be more appropriate. So, in general, global challenges, you already mentioned that, I'm just repeating that, we need global answers. So the transfer of knowledge has to go both ways. As I said, the West has a lot of responsibility for ruining the planet, so we need to provide answers and solutions. But we also, the other way around, we heard about the multilingual and literacy project. There are many answers and solutions, and also many ways of a more sustainable lifestyle that come from India to the Western world. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention. I would be very interested in your comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Claudia, for the brilliant ideas that you shared. The floor is open for questions. If you have any questions, shoot.
Thank you, madam, for very enlightening presentation. If you see, India is largely now an aspirational country, and if you see the way English is looked upon by masses as a passport to better careers, better economic prosperity and all that, because Indian languages are looked down upon as down market languages, they don't have economic value. For example, in Maharashtra, if you see, people aspire to go for English medium education for one particular reason, because as Petru very rightly pointed out, English is viewed as an economic resource. Incidentally, I happen to be a linguist myself, and the topic of my study is very much related to what you just mentioned. the linguistic diversity and the challenge of creating sustainable knowledge society in Maharashtra, taking the case study of Marathi. My observation is when it comes to a language policy, the state of Maharashtra declared Marathi as the state language, but people have opted for the English language for simple reason, the economic prosperity. It opens the doors to economic prosperity. But you have very rightly pointed out that the linguistic diversity, especially the dialects, which are languages in themselves, there's nothing pure or impure about them. And you very rightly pointed out that Marathi itself has become or emerged as a sort of killer language for the dialects. But if we don't go for an inclusive linguistic society or make one common language, which can be a knowledge language, so what possibility do you see for Marathi becoming a knowledge language, especially given the huge linguistic diversity that we have? The linguistic landscape is rather confounding. We have around 27 dialects in Marathi, and every dialect has population, in fact, more than the whole population of countries in Europe. And hardly, someone would speak standard Marathi or Pramana Bhasha, as they call it, if they have to read something or write something. That hardly happens. So, what challenges do you find for languages other than English to emerge as knowledge languages? How they can become a sort of economic resource? You very rightly pointed out about translations, bringing knowledge from other languages into Marathi. Please comment on that. Thank you.
Oh, I'm going to look forward to your paper. It will be very interesting for me to learn more about the local situation. I think what the National Education Policy says is a very, very ambitious program. It includes some kind of status planning, it also includes translations, it also includes, for many state languages, I remember a friend of mine who works in administration says, well, there are so many words I use in English, I don't have them in Marathi. So in terms, this would be corpus planning, making available the words rather than using always English words, making it available to use all the technical vocabulary just to use. But the problem that you're addressing, that people prefer to send their kids to English medium schools as because English is the aspirational language as such, this is not easy to solve, I'm afraid. I think I've heard several times that English medium school is not per se better than the Marathi medium school, it's just that people see it as such. And the UNESCO has UNESCO has said that for years, the best thing for a kid is to become literate in their first language first. Perhaps if it's not possible the local language or local dialect, then at least Marathi and not necessarily English. There is no easy solution to it. I see the tension. You cannot tell parents, if they want that, what can you do? I think one way of tackling that, but this would then of course require a lot of resources to equip Marathi medium schools with, very good teachers, very good facilities, so that they are not, like second-grade schools in terms of facilities. That's a long-term project, and also include more teachers with a multilingual background. I'm looking forward to your paper.
Good morning, ma'am. My topic of research is translanguaging, promoting multilingualism through pedagogical translanguaging in Indian classrooms. So can you please guide us on translanguaging, code switching, mixing and translation? Thank you.
Yeah. Translanguaging, I talked about this with Sachin Lavarit. Translanguaging in the Western context has, I think, a slightly different meaning. So in the Western linguistic context is seen as, what is related to super diversity, people just getting by with any kind of knowledge and language resources that they have. So meaning, if you don't know the language, you just know a couple of words, forget about the grammar, just survive in a different language. So it's frequently, in multilingual context in Europe where people have just arrived as refugees, for example. And from you, I learned it's also used for the classroom, and I think code switching and code mixing is a very good thing. It's research on code switching and code mixing has in the West begun in the 80s, and at the time, so there's a famous paper by Shana Poplek from the 80s that researched the Puerto Rican community in America. At that time, the idea was you code switch because you don't know the other language, or you don't know either language well enough. But she showed that actually code switching, the grammar of code switching is more than the sum of the individual words. So code switching shows heightened resourcefulness in that sense, and I think this is also what the Multilingual project supports. This is a very good thing. Use all the languages that you have, and the more you use the resources of the children, the more you empower them to feel confident, the more you instill pride in their language, and then, so as I said, multilingualism begins at home. If the child is being made to feel inferior about their language, then the language will die and the child will never have these kind of results in class. So use what you have, and code switching is in general a very good thing.
Ma'am, I wanted to ask you, when you told that about Gandhi, that he wanted Hindustani as a main language and not English, and English is a reciprocal language, then how does it become positive nationalism? Doesn't it feel like a national negative one, because he does not want English to be with other languages but only Hindustani? So is it not negative instead of positive?
I think I would, this is something we can debate. I personally saw it as positive because his impetus for choosing one language was, we need one language which is an Indian language because it's more accessible. It is spoken, it's not a majority language, but it's spoken by the largest part of the population. I don't know how much it was at his times. Today I think about 40, somewhere over 40. It's not 50%, something like 40%, and some more percentage speak Hindi in India. But he said English is a language which is not accessible to the large majority of the population at his time. So this is why you're quite right. So it would have been even more positive nationalism if you said everybody speaks what they want. And we have like South Africa did it, we have 11 national languages. But he, in that sense, he took on this European idea of having one national language as a symbol of unity. As far as I know, India didn't exist before the British came. It was different Indian kingdoms. So in a sense, you had to be India as a political entity as such. So with this European idea of having one state came this idea of one nation. But since he wanted one language for democratic participation, I classified it as positive nationalism. But we can talk about that.
Prestige part that you talked about is very interesting because I know an institute which works in Akola on Korku language, and particularly with school kids who know Korku but are not very comfortable even with Marathi. And now the other aspects of that institute, they're trying to teach them Marathi and build their confidence to go to market and use Marathi to speak. So the focus, which should be on teaching subjects in Korku language, now has shifted to teaching things in Marathi. So the preservation of Korku language would not happen. At the same time, the state language is going to be the killer language, as you mentioned. So yes, at probably state level, one has to think of what kind of rules, regulations, and at the same time policy making needs to take place.
Just like to add to that, I think this is what happened to many of the people sitting here in this hall. We have a dialect which is different from the language in which we studied, and then we also learned English. So when I have to say something, maybe I process it in my mother tongue, which is a dialect, and then not in even Marathi, the medium in which I studied. So this happened to many of us in India.
I would like to add to that. Ma'am, as you said, English has become a killer language otherwise also. I did one study and I found that in last 10 years, more than 600 students from Maharashtra committed suicide because they failed in 10th standard English. I have father sitting here. He has done a lot for English language instruction, preparing students for the exam. In IHs and IIMs, 10-15% students become dropout. Not because they are not intelligent, because they have the cognitive barrier, because they have studied in regional languages, and when they have to migrate to English as the language of higher education, they don't have the cognitive resource or their intellectual flourish to take that particular cognitive load. And that's the reason they are dropouts. And suicides also. In Kota, in Rajasthan, there is a place where a lot of students prepare for IIT exams. 20-30 suicides every year because they cannot take the load, and the language is the prime culprit. We have a center where we diagnose students for learning disability and all. And students from linguistic background, Marathi medium, they come. And just because their English is not adequate to actively get engaged with the content in the classroom and all, they appear for parents and the teachers as slow learners. Dyslexic, dysgraphic, dyscalculic, and all those things. In fact, the problem is not of their intelligence, it is the inadequate language. And that affects their learnability. So we have started semi-medium where science and all these subjects are taught in English. But if you talk to students in rural India, they will say, you see, I have failed in math, science and other things, but I have passed in English, so I'm better. That is the level of lack of linguistic confidence to study in the English language. So it's a huge injustice is being, I would say, penetrated or perpetrated against the student community by depriving them of their own mother tongue to study. Agreed that it's the language of higher education, bread and butter and everything, but that particular aspect you very rightly pointed out has to be addressed, the medium of instruction. And some states have already embraced English as the medium of instruction state, disconnecting their own linguistic heritage and all those things. So I would invite you to comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, you're quite right. I mainly stress, what happens in schools, but the goal number 4 is also about lifelong learning. So we have not really talked about higher education, which is uniformly English, and as you correctly said, that is a very real problem. It might even be a deadly problem. Yeah, thank you for pointing it out.
No more questions? Okay. Thank you, Claudia. I think we'll break for lunch now, but before that, I would like Father Solomon Rodriguez to felicitate the principal of Sahyadri College, Dr. Lalita Mutreja.
Thank you, Father Solomon, and thank you very much, Professor Claudia Lang, for highly informative, interactive keynote address. We have reached the end of the inaugural session. I call upon our Vice Principal, Professor Sarita Kurian, to present vote of thanks.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Alvina. Good afternoon to the participants. As we come to the close of this inaugural session, I deem it a great honor to propose a vote of thanks. First of all, I thank the Almighty for this occasion, bringing us all together for this conference. I would also like to propose my sincere vote of thanks to the chairman of the college, His Grace, Archbishop Dr. Felix Machado, for gracing today's conference. He has left us with a message where he says that we should meet man should meet man, nation should meet nation, as brothers and sisters for common goals. We had a very interactive session. Our distinguished keynote speaker of the conference, Professor Dr. Claudia Lang, for expressing her views on an excellent theme, speaking of English as a lingua franca. Your excellent presentation, ma'am, and all the nuances of the language which you have brought out has been excellent, and you have said that home is a place where multilingualism should begin, and it preserves cultural heritage, and it is linguistic that builds resilience, and that's what we all should look forward to. I express my profound gratitude to Dr. Smita Shukla, who isn't present here, Honorable Director of Western Region Center, Indian Council of Social Research, Social Science Research, for collaborating with us and sponsoring today's conference. Ma'am, your support is a motivation for us to organize more academic events like this. I thank you for the same. I extend my thanks to the campus minister, Reverend Dr. Solomon Rodrigues, for gracing the occasion and always being part of us academically and spiritually in our journey in the college. I feel extremely happy to thank the experts of today's technical sessions, Principal Lalita Mutreja, who has joined us, and Dr. Sachin Labde, who has also joined us since the morning, for giving their valuable time for today's conference. Your views and insights will indeed benefit all the participants virtually and in person. Thank you, ma'am and sir, for joining us. My sincere thanks to all the participants and paper presenters who have come here today to be part of this conference, and some of you who are joining us virtually through the Zoom platform. Thank you for your response and support through the papers that you have forwarded to us, which will indeed make this conference a success. Organizing this event requires meticulous planning and execution. And I would therefore like to thank all the core committee members of this conference who have worked ceaselessly in the past month. Thank you, dear colleagues, for bringing this. We have completed the first stage and few more stages to complete. Thank you for being part of this. Finally, I propose my thanks to also the wonderful volunteers who are energetically supporting us at all and every stage of this event and making it a success. Thank you, dear students, for your tremendous support that we need. And once again, I thank all of those present here for your cooperation. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Sarita ma'am. And the inaugural ceremony of one-day International Multidisciplinary Conference is over. Let us break for lunch. We all assemble on the first floor in room number 16. See you there.
Quick announcement, those who want to present papers, please come to this desk. Give your names. No, the technical sessions are divided into two.
Okay, so our names are here or what? Should I? Can I see?
Before we leave for lunch, we'll have a group photograph of all the participants with the keynote address and all the technical experts who are there. All the participants will assemble in the front side of the hall so that we can have a group photo.